Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. Just giving folks a chance to log in. So just bear with us and we'll probably get started at like 2 or 3 minutes after the hour. I'm still seeing participants joining, so we're just going to hold on for another minute and give people a little bit more time to get on. For folks who are on already, you'll see that Kim just put in the chat that the slides are available on a Google Drive location that you can click on that link and get a PDF of today's slides. All right, I think we will go ahead and get started, and hopefully most folks are on, and if others join, hopefully they'll be able to catch up and see where we are. So really want to welcome you all to the webinar today, focusing on reimagining interim housing and transforming our approaches to sheltering people. I'm Matthew Doherty, and we'll all introduce ourselves in a moment. Just really excited to have this conversation with you today to try to keep moving these conversations forward across the country. And I was excited to see some familiar names and some unfamiliar names on the participants list. So we're just excited that folks are interested in trying to wrestle with these issues. Slide, please. So again, I'm Matthew Doherty. I'm a consultant who's working on the framework for an equitable homelessness response project and helping lead this Reimagining Interim Housing project. And prior to becoming a consultant, I was the executive director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. Prior to that, I have roles with Corporation for Supportive Housing and public housing agencies and other roles. I'm really excited to be joined by my partners on this project who have been working with me all along as we've developed the content we're going to talk with you today and about today. And I'm going to give each of them a quick chance to introduce themselves. Shaundell, I'll go to you first.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shaundell Diaz. I go by she, her, hers. I am one of the consultants on the Reimagining Interim Housing project, as well as in my regular life, regular job, should I say, my other life. I am the 3-county continuum of care coordinated entry coordinator, and I cover Franklin, Hampshire, and Berkshire counties in Massachusetts.
Great. Claudine, I'll go to you next.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Claudine Sipili. I am a human with lived experience of homelessness, among other things. I work for a nonprofit organization here in Santa Clara County in San Jose, California, whose mission is to prevent and end homelessness. My role in this organization is Director of Lived Experience and Innovation. Thank you.
Great. And Rashema.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, welcome, everybody. My name is Rashema Melson. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as Black. I'm a speaker coach and consultant from Pain into Purpose, and also have 12 consecutive years of lived experience. And I'm so excited to be here with you all today.
Great. Thank you all for being here. Next slide, please. So just want to give you a quick sense of what we're going to cover today. We are trying to cram in a lot of content today, maybe a little too much content, and we're going to try to stop along the way and have some roundtable discussions among Shaundell, Rashema, and Claudine. So we're going to give you just a very quick overview of the framework project as a whole. We'll dive into the Reimagining Interim Housing project in a little bit more detail. We'll review the publications that have come out as part of that project. We'll talk through the transformation stages and the action areas are described within those materials. We're then going to take the deepest dive just into the first stage and the first action area. And then we'll break for some questions and answers. If you have questions, please try to use the Q&A box or opportunity on Zoom to ask your questions. Then we'll do a very quick review of other stages and action areas. We won't have time to walk through them in the same level of detail. And then we'll take some more questions and answers. So again, just excited to have this conversation. Forgive us if we tried to pack too much into this webinar. But next slide, please. So to make it easy to access the information, just some quick logistics. The framework project as a whole is at housingequityframework.org. There's a link here to the Reimagining Interim Housing materials that we're going to be talking about. The slides, we'll try to send them out after the webinar, and the recording and the slides will be posted on the framework website within the next few days, so we'll stay available. But we also put a temporary link in the chat box where you can access the slides that we are using today if you want to follow along that way. We've also prepared more detailed content in a standalone summary of project materials deck that walks through all of the content in the publications in a higher level of detail than we can cover today. That link will also go into the chat box so you can access that deck and use that as a reference. And then we're expecting to schedule a second webinar to go more deeply into the details, especially the stages and the action areas that we can't cover today. And we're currently aiming to hold that on April 20th. Again, just a reminder that we're going to try to break for questions twice along the way. And hopefully we'll have about 20 to 30 minutes of the time dedicated to questions and answers. Next slide, please. So we just want to make sure people sort of get in the right headspace for thinking about these longer term, bigger picture issues that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to turn it to Claudine.
Thank you, Matthew. For some of you that have just signed in, hello. We're so grateful that you've joined us today, making time to be here for the next 90 minutes with us. I would like to invite you to let go in your mind of the last phone call or commute, anything that you have dealt with within the last hour, and just sort of feel the chair underneath you as it supports your weight. Let go of any unnecessary muscle tension that you're feeling in your body right now as you sit on your chair. And then also let go of any thoughts and images, maybe even from the last past hour. And something I like to say is just take a mental vacation, right? From trying to fix people, from trying to fix all the things that are wrong within the systems that you all work within. We would like to ask you to try and look up from the many, many day-to-day pressure, challenges, and emergencies that we all know you face in your work, and try to spend this time looking beyond those challenges and crises and focus on a longer-term vision of what you want to be accomplishing and how you want to be sheltering people in your communities. And lastly, let go of those challenges just for now. If you write them down, whatever your practice is for getting these things off of your mind for the next 90 minutes, set it aside, maybe share them in the chat box if you'd like, just as a parking lot, whatever helps you for the next 90 minutes so we can have all of you present here with us. Thank you.
Great, Claudine, and I took a couple deep breaths during that as well, just trying to stay focused here. And again, we know we're asking people to think big, think big picture, think long term, and sometimes it's very hard to do that in our day-to-day work. Next slide, please. We want to just give a quick overview of the overall framework for an equitable homelessness response project. Next slide, please. And this project started early in the pandemic and it brought together national organizations and experts to try to help communities respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, think about how to use the new resources that were coming into communities. And since then, we have continued to expand the partnership, and we're focusing on some of the longer term changes and system strengthening kinds of activities that we need to be engaging in to try to create the homelessness response systems that we need to have in place and that would have allowed us to be more effective during the pandemic. Next slide, please. The partners have all adopted some values and principles for our current work. This is something that we regularly do across the organizations, is check in, see whether the values and principles we have identified still fit for the work at hand and what we know people are faced with. These are the ones that we've just recently revised to make sure we're always focusing on advancing racial justice and equity, that we're thinking about concrete ways to address the barriers to housing that people face and the inequitable barriers people face, that we're keeping a prime focus on supporting people to secure and sustain housing. And we're trying to balance that we're acting and investing with both urgency and with purpose and intentionality. And that throughout all the work, we're centering the rights and the expertise of people experiencing homelessness. Next slide, please. We divvy the work of the framework project across 5 action areas. In the summary deck that I talked about that you can access, there's more detail about the work we're pursuing across each of these action areas. This work falls squarely in action area B around sheltering people, and our work to try to make sure we're reimagining and transforming our approaches to sheltering people through stronger models that are safe, that are welcoming, that are affirming, and that can truly support people to end their homelessness. And we're going to dive deeply into that work today with you all. Again, there are more details about these action areas and the other work of the framework project in the summary deck that you can access through the link in the chat box. Next slide, please. So now we want to transition and start talking about the Reimagining Interim Housing project. The materials we're covering today are at the website at Reimagining Interim Housing. Next slide, please. As part of this project, we've actually tried to give a lot of thought to the language and the words we're using, and very thoughtful about the meaning that comes behind words and the impact words have on people and how they respond and how they experience the language we're using. So we want to start by first talking about language and acknowledging that our own language is evolving and likely will continue to evolve over the course of this project. Next slide, please. But first, I'm going to turn to Rashema and talk about the language of people with lived expertise.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. You said something really important regarding the impact, and we want to make sure that we're always thinking about impact over intent. So no matter what our intentions are, it really matters how it lands with the people who we are trying to serve, right? And so we know that the homelessness population is the most vulnerable, or one of the most vulnerable populations within America. And so we've moved to using this term, people with lived experience, lived X. We're trying to put the people's experience and separate them and not have it to be that they are their experience, right? So we try to use person first center language, and that also helps to deal with trauma triggers, which happens a lot for people who have experienced homelessness. And as a person who has experienced homelessness, it's not, it's not fun or nice or valuable, or I don't feel respected when a person says a homeless person, or I'm helping out this person who lives on the street. The language that we have used in the past has been really impacted in a negative way, the community that we work with. And we want to make sure that we're trying to reduce the harm and that we're being respectful and thinking about people. So we want to move forward with using person first centered language and saying people with lived experience. And the other traumas that people may experience as well, and putting respect in front of that. So I encourage people to continue to use that person first centered language.
Great, thank you. And next slide, please. We want to dive into this a little bit more. And so this is one of the times that we're going to have a bit of a roundtable discussion among the panelists today. So anyone who wants to further weigh in on why is it so important that we partner with, that we empower, and that we support the leadership of people with lived expertise in these efforts. Why is that so critical to the work that we're discussing? Anyone want to go first?
Sure, I'll try to take a stab at it first. Hi, again, I'm Shaundell Diaz. I go by she, her, hers. I myself am a person with lived experience, excuse me. And I feel that it's very crucial for our systemic changes and for the important work that we do in trying to prevent and end homelessness, that we partner with people with lived experience. They are the ones that have gone through our systems and can educate us on what is working and what is not working. And part of that partnership is to support folks along whatever part of their journey that they're in, and creating a safe space for them to build on themselves technologically, mentally, educationally, spiritually. I feel it's also really important that we as partners definitely pay for this expertise, right? Because they're helping us to make a difference. So that's my spiel. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Shaundell. I agree with what you said. And I also feel like the people who are closest to the problem have the solution for the problem. So they deserve to be at this table where we're creating these solutions that are action oriented, that we want to see continuous results and not just have a goal. We hit the goal and then we let it go, right? Because the experience of homelessness is people having a hard time. All the stigmas and other things that come with that, they're negative and they're untrue, right? So they're myths. Anyone can experience homelessness, but the people who have experienced homelessness know best. So I think it's super important to be able to partner with people. And I'm the lead of the HUD's People with Lived Experience and Expertise team. And it has been super critical being a part of the different processes of the things that we do, from reviewing products to helping the way systems operate and having that input. And it's put a lot of value back into it. And we've come out being able to better support people who are currently experiencing homelessness. And hopefully that transition is sustainable, and that person can be self-sufficient in that process instead of having people to return to experiencing homelessness.
Thank you, Shaundell and Rashema. So I'd like to summarize by just stating a premise that I think we all know, but sometimes forget. And that premise is no one knows more about the needs of people experiencing homelessness than those with lived experience. And as Rashema and Shaundell already spoke about, people with lived expertise can help us understand the complexities of homelessness, from identifying difficulties accessing and navigating systems that are in place, spotlighting the critical challenges they've faced while traversing some of the ineffective and high barrier processes that are in place in various systems, and then also to pinpointing some essential resources and high demand services that lead to realistic solutions. I definitely think that this is why communities' efforts, such as the efforts you would be undertaking from the guidance that we're providing today in this project, to transform and improve homelessness response systems, should be informed by people who have endured periods of homelessness. As a human with lived experience myself, now working from within the system to drive transformative change, I've become a believer in the value of being very proximate to the challenges that we are trying to solve. And I also think that people with lived expertise, together with systems in every community, we have a collective responsibility to ask more questions and not just give answers, right? So let's provide less prescriptive answers to people, and ask them what it is that they need. How could we help them to resolve their own homelessness? Thank you.
Great, thank you all. Anyone have any final thoughts before we move forward? All right, great. Next slide, please. Then I want to talk about our use of the term interim housing, and we discussed and debated and talked with lots of partners about this, but we did end up settling on the language of interim housing for this project. It really was based upon guidance that we heard from people with lived experience and expertise. Through multiple projects that I've worked on, people have consistently called out that they experience the language of emergency shelter and shelter as stigmatizing and traumatizing, and does not put a good first foot forward for what it is we're asking people to access within our systems. And there's also a broader range of models that exist than what people think of when we simply say the word shelter. So we did choose to use the words interim housing, or sometimes we'll refer to sheltering people as an activity rather than a thing in a place. But just want to be clear, that's not meant to refer to any specific program model. Rather, it's trying to capture the full range of models that exist and are in play in communities. And it's absolutely not meant to imply that people who are staying in interim housing have ended their experience as homelessness, because they very clearly have not. And we still have a responsibility to work with people to find the lasting solutions to their homelessness. But we also recognize that some funding, some programs, in some communities, some regulations, people may have to use the language of emergency shelter or refer to their programs in those ways. So we get it, we understand, but we're going to try to mostly focus on the language of interim housing. Next slide, please. And then this project really does focus squarely on interim housing and its role within effective homelessness response systems and in how we assist people. But we also want to be crystal clear that we know that interim housing alone cannot end homelessness, and nothing about what we're saying is intended to imply anything different. We know that we're ending homelessness is going to require vastly increasing affordable, permanent housing options for people with the right kinds of services. At the scale of interim housing that's needed is going to vary based upon the scale and availability of permanent housing, and that's going to vary from community to community and over time. And we also want to be clear that nothing we are saying is intended to imply that people should have to access interim housing in order to get access to permanent housing. But we do think it's an important part of the system that needs to be strengthened and that we have neglected, and we have a lot of work to do to try to bring this part of our system to where we want it to be. Next slide, please. So the other words that we are going to use pretty consistently are reimagination and transformation, which imply something bigger than simply strengthening a program or tweaking policies and procedures. And so we want to have a little bit of conversation about why we're using those words. And Claudine, do you want to take a first stab at talking about why we're using these words?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you read through the blue and the green bubbles on the screen, I would like for you to focus on your local community and think specifically about some of the things that you either have heard directly from people experiencing homelessness, or maybe even something that you have heard indirectly about what prevents people from entering current shelter facilities or programs, and then what would help ensure that interim housing programs are seen as meaningful and useful options to people who are unsheltered in your community. That's where reimagination comes in, right? So obviously we need to reimagine something because what is currently existing is either not working as well as we would like it to work, or the circumstances surrounding what has been put into place 20, 30 years ago no longer make existing homelessness solutions viable or effective. The COVID-19 pandemic, sometimes I get sick of hearing COVID-19 come up in these conversations, but it's very real. And how this has affected housing and homelessness is it's shined a global spotlight, right, on the limitations and in many ways the failures of our traditional approaches to sheltering people. And I'm specifically thinking of congregate shelters here, sheltering people experiencing homelessness. So reimagining and then transforming these approaches is very needed more than ever. So we can, number one, provide healthier environments for people to receive help and help themselves. Number two, to create more welcoming and efficient systems that keep people safe while they are on the continuum from homelessness to housing stability, and then also to better respond to public health crises. Transformation, whenever I think of that word, I think of metamorphosis, which requires a complete internal change that then manifests itself externally. And transformation scares me a little bit. Butterflies are cute when you think of, metamorphosis, but transformation is scary because it's not a one and done. It's not an overnight thing. It's not even months of work. It can be years of work. And that is why we really want to emphasize the need for reimagination and transformation. Thank you.
Great. And Rashema, I know you had some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I was listening to what Claudine said, and you said it so well. And that's honest, that it is scary, but the only thing that's constant is change. And I think when we think about reimagine, right, there's this quote by Ken Robinson, who wrote The Element, and he says that imagination is the source of every form of human achievement. And that means that sometimes we have to think outside the box of what we've already been doing, right? So they say that if you do the same thing over and over and expect a different result, that it's insanity. So I think, Claudine, to your point, we have to really reimagine and be creative in our approach to this, and even think sometimes of non-traditional methods that we would not use in order to really be able to achieve this mission that we want to do. And when I think of transformation, I think of us moving from transactional to transformational, to really getting into the grooves of things and really wanting to be compassionate with the work, really ready to create that change and see something completely different that we would have never thought about before. So yeah, I'm excited about this. Thank you.
Great. And next slide, please. We're going to dive into this a little bit more as well. We've talked a little bit about what we know interim housing can't do and what it can't accomplish, but still we recognize it as a critical part of a equitable and effective homelessness response system. So I want to spend a little bit of time just reflecting on why is it such an important part, and why do we have to invest time and effort to strengthen it. So Shaundell, I think you were going to take lead on the first question here, but why it's such an important part of our systems.
Yeah, so interim housing it's a vital and critical piece of the homeless response system. Whether you see it as interim housing or for contractual reasons, you still have to continue to call it shelter. It really is important to be able to offer a safe space where someone can focus on getting connected to resources and services that they identify they want to address, and identify their needs that need to be addressed, with the ultimate end goal of moving into permanent housing or permanent supportive housing, or however they want to go. But I also feel that it needs, for it to be effective, it needs to be a coordinated approach that's person-centered and trauma-informed, with a focus on crisis response, right? A lot of folks that we see coming into our interim housing are folks that might have undiagnosed mental health or substance abuse issues, that they just need help to get through and to get connected to the resources. So I feel that interim housing is a very important part of any effective and equitable homeless response system. Thank you.
Great. And Rashema or Claudine, either you want to jump in and add some thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely have thoughts about this one. So in communities like ours here in Santa Clara County, and probably the rest of the Bay Area, where permanent housing vacancies are scarce, I really believe that interim housing is a critical option that provides a place for the unsheltered to live, right? Just get them out of the elements, get them physically out of the encampments into a place where their basic needs, such as food and hygiene and safety, can be met. That's the start. While they start then to receive care and supportive services, and all of these services, wraparound services, would be aimed at helping the person obtain more permanent housing. I also think that, because the statements I made earlier were specific to congregate shelters, I also think that, and we have seen this here in our area, in our county, I also feel that interim housing is far more successful in connecting residents to long-term housing, and it's because of the way the services are set up, right? So there's more investment in one-on-one case management, and then also there's the sense of privacy and security that residents are afforded to start to regain some sense of normalcy in their life, right? To get back on their feet, on their land legs, if you will, and get a feel for what it's like to be back in housing, and then begin to work with staff to start receiving support. In about 6 more slides, we will be talking about the themes and perspectives from the focus groups that were conducted for this body of work. And there you will hear us you will hear about the positives that respondents shared about non-congregate interim housing options. Thank you, Matthew.
Great. Rashema, anything you want to add around interim housing or any other reflections on language more generally?
Yeah, I just wanted to just say one thing because I think Shaundell and Claudine said it so well. I just want to say that people want the help. It's about the approach of how we help them. And I think changing the language really helps us to form that bond to be able to have them to trust us to help them. And we come here today, right, with professional expertise, lived experience, and lived expertise. And there's the question of what do people say they want who have lived experience? And this is what we want: partnership. We want the language change. We want it to be equitable. We want to make sure that we're using that person first centered language. I am a human being. Respect me as a human being first, and then address my experience, right? We're not case numbers or anything else that the system addresses us as, but we're people who have just had a hard time and experienced homelessness, but want better now, and everybody deserves that. It's a human right. So I just wanted to say that.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. We're gonna shift gears a little bit and start talking about the project and some of the feedback we received. Just wanted to open up Shaundell, Claudine, and the other thoughts around language before we move on.
I will just say one more thing, and I'm sorry, but I feel that there's a lot going on right now in our society about woke culture. And I think being able to be responsive and be responsible and just respectful towards how folks identify themselves language wise, it's very important, and making sure that, you know, you're not assuming someone's gender, you're not assuming how they identify just by the way they look. That's really, really an important part of like regarding language. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the project and the processes that we implemented to get where we are today. Next slide, please. So the objective of the project from the beginning was we wanted to try to create some tools that would help communities to envision and pursue transformation of their approaches to sheltering people. So we knew from the beginning that that was the orientation, that we were trying to think about what would it take for communities to be able to pursue transformation and significant change. And I think oftentimes in the homelessness response sector, we don't actually step back and take time to think about how are we going to bring about the change that we're trying to achieve. And this, we were trying to create space for people to think about how to pursue change and to have strong efforts in place. So next slide, please. But within the project, we purposely launched it without having a predefined set of materials that we knew we were going to create. And we really used the processes and all of the collaborative discussions that we had to reach decisions about what could we do within our time and resources that could help move us forward towards that objective. Next slide, please. So key parts of this process was we held focus groups with people with lived expertise. I want to give a shout out to the National Coalition for the Homeless, who led those focus groups for this project. We did interviews with leaders from homeless response systems and provider organizations and national organizations. And then we also held several small group discussions to just try to flesh out ideas and try to think through what would be helpful and what would help create some momentum towards this transformation that we're seeking. We're going to dive most deeply into the focus groups feedback and what we heard from people with past and current experiences of homelessness. Next slide, please. So in total, the coalition was able to conduct 7 listening sessions last late winter and into the spring that had 33 total participants who represented 17 different cities and the District of Columbia, and a very diverse range of subpopulations, ethnicities, sexual orientations, gender identities were represented, and 84% of the people who participated identified as people of color. We're going to walk through the feedback that we heard because we want to be clear that this feedback was sort of our starting place for thinking through what was needed and how could we help move things forward. So next slide, please. And Rashema, I'm going to go to you first for this slide.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, so some reflections that came or responses and experience that came out of those focus groups were about sanitization and cleanliness, right? So when you go into some bathrooms that are made of towel, there's mold within the creases of the towel. It's not always the cleanest, right? But according to the test that's supposed to be passed, as long as the water works and the toilet can flush, it's very operable. Everybody can use it. And I don't think that anybody deserves that. And from the responses that we've received, people are advocating that those are some concerns that they have, that they want more safety regarding that matter, because that can lead to health issues. And I don't think, that that's fair to have somebody to stay in that environment. Also, there was the concern around security and safety. So you have security guards who are on duty, and if something happens, literally whoever company that they're with, that they're here on behalf of, it's not my job to break up this, or it's not my job to be worried about that. People don't feel safe even though there's someone there, or if there is the absence of security there. So there's the security of safety and things that take place within shelter environments, which is sexual assault and violence and other things that can take place. It's very serious. So advocating that there needs to be some more things in place to be able to ensure the safety of people who are staying at the interim housing. Also, there was compassionate treatment of just showing the concern that people care about the people they're serving, right? I'm not just here to show up for a job. And that earlier was said, from moving from transactional to transformational. We want to make sure that people understand that we care, that we are here to serve, and that their needs do come first. And it's not received within a cold manner, that they feel like, not that they belong there, that they're welcomed, and that getting the help is okay, and they feel okay with doing that and not pushing them away. And lastly, there was the concern and advocacy for uplifting non-traditional shifts. People who are working have 3 different shifts, right? You have the night shift, the afternoon shift, and the morning shift. And so people want to make sure that they have people to be there for them, to service them at all times of the day. And that if they are working non-traditional hours, that they're able to come in and still be serviced and not have that to be a concern. So that was some of the things from the focus group that was raised. And I'll pass it back to Matthew.
Great, thank you, Rashema. And next slide, please. And Shaundell, if you could summarize this slide.
Hi, so some of the focus groups and the themes and perspectives specifically of this group were that we talked about shelters and congregate shelters and different shelter options that there were, although there really wasn't, as you can see, there a clear consensus on the role of large congregate shelters. There were many other options that were brought up, especially alternatives. I believe some of them were tiny homes, renovating, empty buildings and things like that to provide shelter. Also, most participants thought that congregate shelter should be available, and even though it wasn't something that a lot of people talk, like, how do I say this? A lot of people that have gone through congregate shelter, it's a traumatizing experience. You have to watch out for your stuff. You have to be careful with being victimized. You have it can just be all around traumatizing, which also Rashema identified the safety issues with congregate settings. But there were suggestions that were provided for creating, separate and different types of spaces, including some congregate settings. But what I really wanted to focus on was this last response on respondents who stayed in a hotel-based program expressed many positives. So including privacy, showers, refrigerators, locked doors, the opportunity to meet with case managers, the ability to isolate, a sense of community and safety, and positive impact of self-esteem. So that showed us that when you separate, right, when possible, to create a non-congregate interim housing setting, where you're able to provide a person with their own autonomy, that provides them with their own, integrity to keep their space clean. They feel safe. They feel that, the other guests are maybe a group of people where they can create a community. It opens them up to a different understanding, and it also opens them up to a different point of view where they can begin to feel not only accepted, but heard, right? And that gives them the opportunity to open up a little bit more to those that are trying to advocate for them, as well as connect them to resources, and where you have the opportunity to build trust. So
Great.
thank you.
Great, thank you, Shaundell. And next slide, please. And Claudine, you'll lead us through this feedback.
Yes, absolutely. So it's really not surprising to me, just looking at the previous slide that Shaundell showed, talked about, that the positives that respondents were identifying about non-congregate options, right? In this case, hotel based options include privacy and having a locked door and having access to a shower and a refrigerator. I mean, it's not surprising at all. I really want to just go back to the basics, and the basics is we are talking about temporary living arrangements for people, right? These are human beings, just like me and just like you. And so if we put ourselves in units or in congregate shelter beds, or whatever you want to call it, a warehouse of bunk beds, that you might see in a congregate shelter, you start thinking about these same things that respondents are reporting on. So specific to this slide, people identified things that didn't work well within even the hotel based programs, and those revolve around having to share rooms between complete strangers, right? And then also lack of access to support staff and difficulty in coordinating with staff in some programs. And then there were also experiences with police raids in one program, and the fact that many people were returned to homelessness as funding for hotel-based programs or other non-congregate options dried up and ended. Participants expressed the need for a wide range of models. For this focus group, tiny homes were mentioned most frequently, although there were mixed options about such settings. Similarly, some people talked about 3D printed houses as other approaches. Those were mentioned several times, and then abandoned hotels, unused schools, other buildings were also mentioned as possibilities for conversion into interim housing. This last part here, most, but definitely not all participants leaned heavily towards permanent housing as the place where most resources would be targeted. And if I were still unsheltered, or if I were still bouncing in and out of congregate shelters, this is where I would land too. I would land in permanent housing for myself and my family, where I don't have to share anything with anyone, having my own place. Although all respondents thought that interim housing should still be a part of the funding mix and not omitted from housing continuum options. And there was also strong support for dedicating time, effort, and resources to strengthening approaches to sheltering people. In my county, in Santa Clara County, we've facilitated similar focus groups, specifically within our emergency interim housing sites, where residents noted and helped us understand that interim housing sites can serve them as secure places for residents to regain their grounding, get some stability under their feet, and then focus on relearning whatever the life skills are that they need to achieve self-sufficiency. We understand, and this is also my individual position on this, while interim housing sites can be very effective in helping residents stabilize and rebuild their lives and have that sense of belonging, ending homelessness requires a whole lot more, and that whole lot more really is landing on affordable permanent housing for people. And that's all I have to say about that.
Great.
Back to you, Matthew.
Great, thank you all, appreciate that. Next slide, please. And so for folks who want to dive a little bit more deeply into the feedback that we received, if you look at the publications themselves or the summary deck that we provided, there's more detail about the input from the focus groups and also the interviews with leaders from different parts of the system. So we welcome you to dive into that content more deeply. And now we're going to dive into, next slide, please, the publications themselves and some of the critical content and the guidance that we're trying to provide community. So we released in December 2 publications, and we'll walk through both of those, the main publication in a lot more detail. Can you go to the next slide, please? So again, through all of the feedback that we heard, all of the conversations, our approach is really informed by it being clear that we have neglected, collectively, we have neglected to focus adequately on supporting and guiding the implementation of high quality, low barrier housing placement focused interim housing options. And it also became clear that just making adaptations and fixing some things about current programs was not fully responsive to what we were hearing from people with lived experience and lived expertise, and that a broader, more transformational change was needed. So what we tried to do was to provide guidance on how communities can systematically pursue that kind of comprehensive reimagination and transformation. But we also know that there's an urgent need to strengthen operations and day-to-day practices and outcomes of existing programs right now. Next slide, please. So in the end, we created 2 documents that were published in December. The first main document we'll spend the most time on today dives into what we have laid out as a roadmap for how communities could pursue the more comprehensive change. And then the supplement focuses on tools that currently exist, created by a lot of different organizations, some local examples, just the things that we could find that could help strengthen current programs and services right now. But not too surprisingly, there were lots of gaps in what's currently available, because this really has been a part of our system that we have pretty profoundly neglected. Next slide, please. So we're just going to talk about the supplement quickly first. So we did cast a pretty broad net, looked widely for tools and resources that could help programs strengthen their activities right now. And we ended up organizing those into different topic areas within this supplement, focusing on things like partnering with people with lived expertise and providing equal and equitable access and outcomes, things focused on addressing physical and behavioral health and safety needs of people staying in programs, things focused on aligning with diversion-focused strategies. So within the document, you'll find the tools and resources organized into these topic areas. Next slide, please. And then we found some webinars and some online learning opportunities, some things that are very brief documents or visual illustrations, as well as some longer, more detailed materials and guidance documents. And then for each section, we also identify what we think are some of the biggest gaps in what's available around the different topics and the areas of strengthening their work. And there are lots of gaps. And as part of the materials, we sort of put out a call if people know of other tools, resources. There's information in the document about where you can send that so that we could maybe do a future edition with a broader range of tools. Next slide, please. Now I want to dive into the main document more deeply. So it's the Reimagining Interim Housing, the stages and action areas for transforming approaches. And we do want to be clear, we put this together as what we thought of as a guiding roadmap that communities can seek to follow and implement, but with the expectation that communities would look at what we were providing, the kind of framework we were using, and apply their own creativity and customize the approaches to best fit their own community. We want to be clear, we weren't able to answer every question that we know people would bring to this issue. We don't have best practices that we can document for pursuing this kind of transformation yet. But we are going to be doing more work to try to support communities to understand and implement this roadmap, adapt it for their own communities, and over time, hope to become able to answer more questions, provide more examples, start to identify some of the strongest practices. Next slide, please. And then I just want to be clear around what we weren't able to do and what the document doesn't yet do. It doesn't provide day-to-day operations and services guidance for providers. That again wasn't what we were trying to solve for. We were trying to solve for what would it take to pursue this kind of change. But it provides lots of guidance and recommendations and things to think about, but it doesn't prescribe the exact steps in which things need to be followed, because we know that's going to vary for every community. We don't identify communities who have implemented this kind of a roadmap yet, because we're not really aware of communities who have pursued it in this kind of systemic way, but hope to over time be able to work with communities. And then we haven't identified specific funding sources that would support this kind of transformation. And I know that's going to be one of the biggest obstacles that we all face as we try to bring about this change. The opportunities are going to be different. But so I just want to be clear, we knew we weren't solving for that in this work so far. And then maybe over time, we can start to build momentum that would start to zero in on the funding that could help support this kind of work. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give a quick overview of the transformation stages and the action areas that we've laid out. It's kind of a framework for communities to work from and adapt. And we're going to go most deeply into the first stage. Next slide, please. Just a couple of disclaimers here that we know that the content on the following slides, it's abridged from what's in the document, but it is still pretty dense. So we're not expecting people to be able to absorb everything today. And that's why we've tried to provide the information to you in multiple formats and multiple sources and different levels of depth. And we're going to skim through most of the stages in the action areas. If you want to get the full content, the best place to go is to the publication itself. And then we're going to offer another webinar in April that will dive more deeply into the stages and the action areas and get more into the details of some of this work. Next slide, please. So what we've done is as we created the framework and thought about how to support these kinds of transformation efforts, we identified work that could be done in 3 stages, so that you're in the first stage, you're initiating the work and you're establishing the vision for the transformation that you're seeking, and you're getting a solid shared sense of what it is you're aiming for. And in the second stage, you're starting to innovate and starting to find new ways to pursue that vision that you all have established together, and you're pursuing multiple ways of transforming efforts concurrently at the same time. And then we see a third stage as being really conscious about evaluating how things are going. Are the changes you're making having the impact you anticipated? What do you need to strengthen about it? And throughout all of this work, you're leading with a focus on racial justice and equity, and you're always seeking and following the guidance of people with lived expertise and people who are in direct service roles and on the front end of your system. And we're expecting that communities have to cycle through these stages and action areas multiple times, strengthening their efforts over time. Next slide, please. So within each of the stages, we then identify 6 different action areas in total, split out across the 3 stages. We identify some potential objectives that you might want to prioritize and really make sure you're achieving in that stage. And then we are very explicit about specific ways that you could prioritize how you're partnering with people with lived expertise and how you are focusing on advancing toward equity and justice, provide some other implementation recommendations. And then when we could, we identified other tools that could support your work in these areas. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense of the full framework, the first stage, initiating this work, the action area is focusing on identifying and describing the values and standards to be embraced within interim housing programs. And that's the one that we'll dive into most deeply. In the second stage, you're starting to innovate and pursue multiple ways of transforming your approaches, which could be adding new models and programs, assessing the success and identifying areas for improvement. How well are you doing in achieving the values and the standards that you've identified? You're deploying capacity building and quality improvement efforts to try to strengthen the ability of programs to achieve those values and standards. And then you're really making sure you're thinking through how does your interim housing programs fit within your systemic efforts, and are they playing the roles that you need them to play, and are they supported by the other programs and where they need support in order to be able to play those roles. And then the third stage, iterate, you're starting to adapt your improvement efforts and initiate shifts to successful models. And you might be thinking about your next route through these different action areas and how you can strengthen your work. Next slide, please. So the first stage, again, focuses on establishing the vision for transformation. This will give you a sense of the content that we provide for each of the stages and action areas. So we identify objectives. And in this case, you're likely focusing on implementing collaborative, open planning and engagement processes to identify and understand the values and standards your community is going to strive to achieve, and any standards that and current values and standards that need to be discarded, and you need to embrace something different. You're going to be ensuring that the values and standards reflect and center the current and future needs and interests of people experiencing homelessness. And you're going to have the objective of trying to create community support and engagement into the transformation processes. So then we follow that with content to try to help you think through how could you pursue those objectives. Next slide, please. So first, for each action area, we're very explicit about some examples and ideas of how you could partner with people with lived expertise. So I'm not going to read all these out, but in this case, you want to be making sure you're thinking about paid roles for people and engaging them throughout the process, and have really leadership roles that people can be playing. You want to make sure you're hearing from people with current and recent experiences of your programs, as well as from people who are unsheltered. And you want to make sure you're understanding what prevents people from entering current programs and would help ensure that programs were seen as meaningful and useful options to people. And then similarly, in each section, we're very explicit about things that could help advance racial justice and equity and how you do the work, and in making sure you're centering those issues throughout all of the discussions. In this action area, you'd want to be very transparent about, are there current values and standards within your system that are reinforcing inequities and are working at cross purposes to justice? And are you partnering with communities and neighborhoods that are most impacted by housing instability and homelessness? So again, these are just examples of things that you could think about how to make sure your work was advancing efforts in these areas. Next slide, please. And then for each action area, we provide a lot of examples of other implementation recommendations, things to think about as you pursue this work. So here, one piece of advice is that you really do want to make sure you engage with voices with diverse opinions and perspectives, but don't expect that you're going to get 100% agreement, consensus, or support. And you don't need 100% agreement to move forward. And when you're seeing that perspectives are in conflict, give the greatest weight to what you're hearing from people with lived expertise, and use that as kind of the guiding decider about where to focus time and effort and change. Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about that this stage of the work is around thinking through the qualities and the values and the standards and what it is you want to be accomplishing as you provide interim housing and sheltering options for people. So we thought it'd be helpful to just give you a sense of some of the kinds of words that came up through the focus groups and through the interviews we performed. There was a lot of just ideas about what we should be moving towards and seeing stronger about the programs. And we're not going to go through all of these, but some of the things that came through strongest were the focus on making sure people are being treated with dignity and respect and feel valued within the programs. I'm thinking about the role that these programs have within a housing first oriented system, and how are they helping people to solve the housing challenges that they face. Really heard also a lot about making sure that the time that people spend in these programs is valuable to them and is helpful to them. And that we also want to just make sure we're thinking about how we can break down stigma and other impacts that people experiencing homelessness often experience more as they seek help from our systems. Next slide, please. So here again, just wanted to have a quick discussion here among the panelists of when you think about the values and the qualities that need to be embraced as we try to reimagine interim housing. What are some of those qualities or values that you think are most important? Or why do you think it's so important that we start at this stage and think through these things before we dive into actions? Anyone want to go first?
I can definitely. No, go, Claudine.
Thank you, Rashema. So this question just makes me think of something that I a purpose that I have assigned to myself in this work that I do, and that is treating everyone with dignity, right? And affirming the dignity of the people that are experiencing homelessness, but also the people that are not, right? It's the people to our right and to our left, and that's why for me the value that stands out from that list is dignity and respect. We all as human beings have this need that goes unspoken many times of being treated with dignity and respect, and it translates into very simple things and in various sheltering options, right? So like having your own bathroom. If you're a person that has maybe is on medications or whatever physical conditions you have that might require you to get up in the middle of the night to go use the bathroom, wouldn't it be so amazing and dignifying to wake up in the middle of the night and walk about 4 feet or 6 feet to the bathroom, right? Instead of the getting up and leaving to walk wherever the community bathroom is. I feel like that's so important, and it's something that sticks out for me because this is a value that that I felt like I needed a lot when I was experiencing homelessness myself. I felt that a lot of people didn't want to look directly at me for fear that they might see something that they didn't like in my eyes, or maybe it was their own feelings, or that they couldn't deal with by being confronted with this issue of homelessness right in their face. And this is why I feel very strongly about this. The other value that I chose is just being human-centered, having a human-centered design. When we focus and when we center all our efforts on money, when we put a dollar sign in the middle of a strategy, we're not going to have or produce solutions that are effective at solving human problems, especially for those that are most vulnerable and experiencing homelessness. So I'll stop there, Rashema. Go ahead. Thank you for letting me go on.
Of course. Yeah, you touched on one of mine. I love all the values because they all matter. They're all important. But I definitely think the first thing off the bat was in my head was human-centered design. I think how can you do something without that approach when you are dealing with human beings? And it's so important, as you said it, and you said something so important when people look you in your eyes. Sometimes for me, I felt what it was through my experience is that it was their own guilt. It was their own judgments that they put on you. Like they will look at you and was like, oh, wow, you look like a human. Yeah, I am one, right? So we want to make sure that we're approaching people in the way that we want to be approached. I think the second thing for me was breaking stigmas, because there is so many, I can't even name them all, of just who people are who have experienced homelessness, who are currently experiencing homelessness. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that perpetuate inequities within the system, is we really need to break that down and demystify them and just all the things, and just like get rid of stigma, because it's just causing more harm. And there's this saying that I live by. It's a cultural saying, if you know, you know. And I didn't respect or quite understand the lifestyle or the feelings that a person who was experiencing homelessness until I experienced it. So you only know when you're in that position. And I think that's where empathy comes in at. We have to have more empathy than we do, not sympathy, because I think so far what it is sympathy. Oh, put these people housing, and there is this mindset, but we need to dig deeper and have that empathy. Like, what if we were in these individual shoes, right? And then the last one was equity and justice. I think people still are confused on what equity and equality, the difference between the two are, right? We want equal outcomes, not just you give this person this, you give this person this, because due to honestly, just the culture of things and how people started out. People are at different levels. People need different help. People have different needs, and people are in different situations, which means that through that human-centered approach, we would know that because we would individualize that care for them. So that's why we have so many different options of ways to implement interim housing and why people with lived experience should be involved in this process. And I'll leave it at that because Shaundell, I want you to go and uplift your values.
Yes. So thank you, Claudine and Rashema. You guys spoke so well, and everything is valuable, right? And definitely it's important to embrace everything that's on that examples list of qualities and values, right? But I wanted to go a little bit further and say that trauma-informed healing environments, harm reduction, low barrier, meaning don't make it so difficult for people to get the help that they need. Those are the most important to me. And true choice, not saying, oh, well, we gave them, 2 housing application options and, no, true choice. Where do they want? Where do they want to live? What do they want to get help for? What do they feel that are the most important needs that they need to address at this moment in time? And also making sure to making this time valuable, right? There's a lot of people who don't want to go into shelters, into interim housing for whatever traumatizing reason, right? They prefer to be literally outside in the elements than be inside for a reason. But when they do finally come in, making sure that you're making their time valuable, you're connecting them, you're being that person that they can trust, not just somebody else who is pushing them along the road, right? I like Rashema. I have a quote that's in the signatures of all my emails at work. And it says, we fail to realize that even though clients require us to be competent enough to meet their needs, it is ultimately our honesty, humility, and selflessness that will endear us to them and allow them to trust and depend on us. And that is by Patrick Lencioni. So with that, thank you very much. I'll return it back to you, Matthew.
Great. Thank you all. I'm going to go to the next slide, and here we were going to pause for some questions, but I don't actually see any questions in the Q&A box yet. So this would be your chance to put a couple questions if you have any into the Q&A box. We'd especially love questions that are around effectively partnering, empowering, supporting with people with lived expertise or related to these qualities and values that we've been talking about. While people formulate questions, I'm going to throw things. I'm going to take a couple minutes just to run through the other slides we have, and then we'll come back and we'll do all the questions all at once. I think that'll be most efficient so people can spend a little time formulating questions, and then we'll go through those in just a couple minutes. So next slide, please. So again, I know we've already covered a lot of content, a lot of information, and so the next content is going to be very high level. We're just going to make sure people understand the structure and the stages that we're talking about. So next slide, please. So the second stage is where there's a lot of the heart of the work of innovating and pursuing different kinds of transformation efforts, and adding new models and assessing what's working, and developing the capacity building and then quality improvement, and aligning these programs within these systems. And this may be the time where locally you're also really trying to think through, well, what can we do with current resources, or where do we need to advocate for or try to leverage or find other resources to support the vision that we've established in the first stage. Next slide, please. So then the third stage, again, is sort of this iterative process. You're going to adapt your improvement efforts. You're going to start shifting to things that seem to be working better. And you're likely going to be ready for another cycle through the first stage and the second stage again, and continue to sharpen your efforts. Next slide, please. So again, for each of the stages, we provide the same level of detail that we walked through for the first stage. So it's a lot of dense content in the documents. Really, again, hoping people can see it as something that you can pick and choose from, and that can help inspire you to think about how you could pursue this work and how that stage or that action area might apply within your community. Next slide, please. And then just quickly preview, and then we'll start to get to questions, but just want to quickly preview the work ahead. So this webinar is going to be posted on the framework website within the next couple of days. We are planning a second webinar for April to be able to go through more of the details of the different stages and action areas. In addition, we're planning to offer a series of roundtable discussions through the rest of 2023, try to bring together some communities who are engaged in this work or trying to engage and learn from one another and start to generate some momentum. If there appears to be interest in sort of people dropping into office hours to ask questions and talk about things related to this, we might schedule those. If that is something that feels like it's of interest to you, you might just put a note in the chat box so that we'll know who might be interested in that. We'll be looking for opportunities to present at different conferences. And then hopefully through all of this, we'll learn, we'll think more deeply, we'll continue to evolve, and we might refine the ideas and the materials by the end of this year. And then the goal is to dive more deeply into one or two communities and provide more direct technical assistance to a community or two who are trying to implement this kind of transformation. And if at any point you want more info, you can feel free to email me, and can help answer questions or point you in the right directions. And next slide, please. So before we get to the audience questions, just quick thoughts. I think first forgot my order here, first from Claudine and then Shaundell, how do we hope communities will be able to use these ideas and these tools? And then if there's anything else you'd like to add before we go to questions.
Yeah, thank you. I am empathizing with you all, listening to all this information that has been presented. If I were sitting in your seat, I would ask myself the question, is this realistic for my local community, my organization, my county, my COC? And I've seen some comments in the chat bring up funding, right? So this is, I saw a comment from Annie too that said high demand, limited resources, and that's very, very real. And I can't even begin to fathom like where to start with all of that. Is it policy and advocacy? But anyhow, so bringing that back here to this question, my hope is that if you can take something away from today's webinar, it would be to maybe look at viewing this framework as a launch pad, if you will, for identifying maybe some unrealized opportunities within your sheltering, the sheltering options that you have in your local communities. And also, I thought about what it might look like for you to use this framework as a lens that you look through as you begin conversations or maybe even take actions towards conducting your own systems assessment or evaluation of your system of care and your existing shelter options, and begin to see where some of the tools and ideas provided in this framework can be helpful. I think it's a whole lot. It's a whole elephant, right? So it's overwhelming, and for me, it's definitely intimidating. This thing that is so huge, but it's so needed, right? We all know it's needed. Every year, we continue to see the rise in numbers of homelessness across the country, in my own state, in my county. And enough is enough. We have to get to a place where we put our feet down and we go, we're going to put our gloves on and do this thing, right? So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Great. And Shaundell, I know you've been working with some partners in your region around this work.
Yes. And I see a lot of folks of those partners in the group chat. So thank you for being here. But what I really want to say is one thing that I hope that all of you get out of this is that there needs to be systemic change. And no matter where you start, it needs to start somewhere, right? You need to start the change somewhere. In our rural Western Mass area, we have come together and we formed a work group. That work group consists of more than a couple, maybe a little bit more than 20 folks, some of who are here present today. And we just started, right? We basically did a deeper dive, had a conversation on what was presented in these tools. And we're going to come back to the table after this meeting, right? And we're going to identify what areas we can see, right, that we can change without looking for funding opportunities within our own systems. What can we change? What can we put into play right now from this roadmap that can help us to start make that change little by little? That's what's important. And it's not, again, just reviewing this and having conversations. No, you need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And again, by doing that and expressing just the strong importance that involving and paying people with lived experience to be at these decision-making tables is key. As all of us have stated previously, they are the ones that are going to help educate us to make the change that's necessary. So I just wanted to make sure I push that out there. Make sure that you start somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and a few questions have come into the Q&A box, but before we go there, Rashema, any quick thoughts you want to offer before we start taking questions?
Just in collaboration or move forward with collaboration of lived experience versus learned experience, which is, I think, what we're trying to emphasize here. And also, I've been reading the chat. So there's this question in the chat that I want to get to too. It's not in the Q&A box. But basically not just looking at what we're proposing or the things that we're uplifting, but look at the things that currently haven't been working as well. I think you can learn from both sides of the spectrum of what to do and what you've already tried that hasn't been as successful, and understand that success is not your measurement, but for the people who currently experience homelessness and where they are.
Great. Okay, so next slide, please. We'll start doing some questions. We have about 12 or 15 minutes here. One question's come in is that one of the issues people face when they lose their homes is isolation from broader community. And people are, the question is interested for that, something we heard through the focus groups, or how you think we should respond to that issue that people face. So the challenge of loss of community, and how can we help support people to engage with community and find community through these programs. Anybody have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a thought. I mean, it's a no-brainer to me, but that's because I've been to a lot of our emergency interim housing sites and actually talked to the people that live there after they moved there from the encampments. And so the no-brainer part is ask them what is it that they need to help them build community, help them build relationship, not just with the other residents at the sites, but also staff, right? So staff are there to provide support, and I don't know about other people, but for when I was a part of a client receiving services, it mattered a lot to me that I trusted the person that I worked with, and it mattered even more when that person could empathize with what I was currently walking through at the time. And that now translates for me to peer-to-peer support, or working with an intake specialist that has, or a resident advocate staff member that has lived experience of homelessness themselves. So the other part about that is being more intentional about design, right? Site design, designing spaces out in the courtyard, or maybe in between buildings, or maybe there's a barbecue pit where people naturally gravitate towards, right? Or having, I don't know, cooking classes or things like that, community-based events that bring people together that would not normally come together, right? Food is an amazing thing. Everybody loves and eats food. Like that's one way to do it, right? So just thinking about building a stronger sense of belonging and community between residents, and thinking about your own, like, how would you build community for yourself if you and your family just moved into a subdivision, or you just purchased a home or moved into a brand new apartment? What do you begin to do to form community? It's the same things that people experiencing homelessness need. Thank you.
Great. We also have a question around thoughts about how to get a system to pause in its work on improving and updating large-scale crowded shelters and instead devoting time and effort and resources to creating non-congregate settings. Any thoughts you all have about how to make that shift possible, or how to create the opportunity for thinking about what we should be doing differently?
I want to take a stab at this, but I don't want to sound silly, right? And maybe I don't sound silly, maybe it's just in my head, but the legislature, those who represent you in your community, our representatives, right? Our state representatives reaching out and saying, if you have enough people reaching out about the same thing constantly, then you'll get the attention that you need. That's basically the only thing that I can think about, is just like reaching out to your state reps and just saying, hey, this area we are yours. You're representing us. This is what we need.
Other thoughts, reactions?
Yeah, I guess I'm just feeling very empathetic today because I'm really empathizing with Jesse here on this question. And I think, Jesse, you already know that is unrealistic. You can't just put a pause on a large scale crowded shelter, right? Because people need to be indoors. People, the most vulnerable people that are outside in the elements need to be inside. And then we come face to face with the other limitation that I think Annie in her comments in the chat talked about, right? About high demand but limited resources. So I think somewhere, I think pretty close to the beginning of the framework document, it does talk about like taking small little bites of the things that you need to do to start the process. And that's why I really feel like the areas that Matthew presented earlier are so useful. You're not going to be able to just put a pause on everything and then get to work, get your hands dirty on improving congregate shelters, maybe even taking a wrecking ball to it, break the whole thing down and start over, right? It's very unrealistic, though. I wish we could do that. I see that someone else would like to answer the question. Thank you.
And the other thing I would offer is this is, I think, part of why we really emphasize the front end of this process is dialogue and community conversation and thinking through the values and making sure those conversations happen in community and lead with the voice of people with lived expertise and bring their voices to the table to make sure the conversation is happening, as a way of trying to slow things down sometimes, or at least make sure the next decision is informed by this better sense of what are the values and the qualities that you're committing to as a community, knowing that things are going to move, but maybe there's a way to make sure at some point the next step is really deeply informed by the dialogue that you were able to foster. Next question that's coming through Q&A is, and if people are putting questions in the chat box, I apologize, I'm going to struggle to keep track of those there. So if you're able to put them into the Q&A box, that'll be easier for me to focus on. And we probably won't get to every question, but that'll also give me a list of questions that we can try to draft up written answers to following the webinar. So one question that's come in is thoughts around how to engage shelters and providers into conversations about this transformative work, especially when they aren't publicly funded. So how do you bring people to the table? So I would love your thoughts, panelists, on that question. And I will flag that throughout the document, we actually tried to offer some specific tips and guidance about how to try to both have a carrot engagement approach, as well as ultimately you might sometimes need some force mechanisms when providers are reluctant. But other thoughts about how to bring people to the table? Anyone on the panel want to respond?
I can help here, Matthew, only because I am a member of our county lived experience advisory board. We were established in 2018, so it's been 5 years. And here's the thing, we were actually approached by the operator of the biggest shelter, congregate shelter in our county. And they came to us and wanted this, right? So that may not be the case where you are, Laurel. So what made this work so well for us was they wanted people with lived experience, with current and former lived experience of homelessness, to be the people that led the conversations, and then also the transformative work. And what we did was we collected feedback. You know, we collected feedback from residents and also from staff at the shelter, and then we also had a secret shopper. You know, we had a couple of people from our lived experience advisory board that spent the nights there, and they were able to interview and participate themselves in the intake process and experience what the night would look like to be in a shelter. And I really think it's a great place to start when you approach the shelter operator or approach that organization from a need to solve a problem that is very visible. So I think all of that matters, and I know my answer is nowhere near meets what you're looking for, but it's a starting point. So people with lived expertise. Thank you.
Anyone else have thoughts on what would help bring people to the table for the conversations?
I also think one more thing. So I'm not sure if this is available in other communities. It's definitely available in mine in Santa Clara County. If there's a nonprofit or some kind of an entity in your COC or in your community that acts as a convener or a connector, my organization, Destination Home, is that for our system. So it would help to have a third party entity like that become involved. If you don't have one, I have no idea where you would start. Maybe you can reach out to me by email, and I can try to help explore some options.
Great. And I know we're actually kind of come up to the end of our time. We want to make sure we respect folks' time today. There's one quick question I think folks maybe be able to answer quickly in the time we have available, that the issue of whether the language of complete an assessment, that some people might experience that language or that process as traumatizing. Does anyone want to offer any quick reflections on that?
Yeah. Okay, really quick. The language assessment is in itself, nobody wants to be assessed. And so I feel like when you're looking for prioritization and you're going in to receive housing and somebody says, well, you need to fill this out. And if you don't get this score, what the assessment itself represents, if you don't get a certain score, people are forced to fabricate answers. People are in a position where it is, oh, not this again, because the last time I had to say this or I didn't get the housing. And it shuts down also the trust that Shaundell brought up earlier in saying, I don't want to do that route. So which is why we are thinking about reimagining how we do it. And in multiple communities outside of this, there has been where we have created new, we don't call them assessment, but we have created new tools to kind of see where the people who are experiencing homelessness are and how we can meet those needs and prioritize everyone. But it's traumatizing because essentially people don't get the help that they need. So hearing that word is, oh no, it's kind of like for me being a Black woman going to the hospital and not getting the care I need and my pain level being looked at differently than someone else's. So when I hear, oh, you have to go to the hospital, oh, no, that is the mental state that it puts people in.
Yeah, and I will just say that as a community in our area specifically, we came together to make our assessment more equitable and more accessible. And we do trainings every month or every 3 months to assessors in the community that again are volunteering for this. They don't get paid to do this, right? So they want to make sure that they're creating that bridge where people are presenting to our coordinated entry system as a continuum, but also making it more as a conversational piece. you don't have to answer literally. Our assessment is not meant to be answered line by line. It is meant to be answered over time after gaining trust and having open conversations. It's a conversational piece. So trying to make it more conversational rather than checking off boxes is also something. And I believe in the resources, our tool is considered a resource, right, Matthew?
Great. Well, we are at time. We're even a little bit over, and I know folks have many, many things to get back to. We have, as one person in the chat referred to, many alligators to deal with. So we want to respect your time, but really thank you for engaging in this conversation. We really feel like these are some of the first steps of just starting to rethink, how do we move forward? What do we need to do to lay the groundwork to bring about the change that we're hoping to achieve? So appreciate you taking this step with us. Look for more things in the future. Look for other opportunities to engage in further conversation with us. And just really want to thank Shaundell, Rashema, and Claudine for their partnership and participation today. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.